It's 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started. And let me just explain that the session that you're in it's on book banning. And so what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about efforts that have happened for book banning and why book banning happens and why it shouldn't and that kind of thing. And then also, if you've seen on the schedule after this one, we're also having a session that is my favorite banned books. So then we're going to talk about books that we've loved that, not exactly the same group, but kind of, and we're going to talk about books that we love that have been banned. But this one we're going to start out talking about the actual banning efforts that have been going on. And I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, so why don't you start?
Okay. Hi, I'm Raederle Sterling. I am a high school English and theater teacher with in an urban school district here in the Twin Cities. And I've been teaching for 15 years now and I've been everywhere. And working with a lot of different populations of students, rural and urban and suburban and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I have a lot of stuff to talk about.
Hi, I'm Meredith Gillies. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the queen of all things barcode at Hamline University. I am the circulation and interlibrary loan paraprofessional menace who brings books into the hands of people.
Hi, I'm Kelleher. I am a librarian that doesn't work in a library. I work for Mackin Educational Resources in their new school services department. So I curate brand new libraries for schools across the country. Specifically, my areas that I work with are New England and a nice portion of Texas, which is always fun. And it's book banning gets interesting when you have to look at it on a nationwide scale.
I'm Danith McPherson. I have been an English teacher. I taught language arts 7 through 12 along the line. And then I was a curriculum director, a K-12 curriculum director for a number of years. I'm also a writer. These are my books. I have cards if you're interested in seeing them later. I got pulled into some banned book stuff as a curriculum director, and then recently in our local school district we had an attempt to ban a book, and I was involved in an effort to change that. So we're going to start out with, first of all, why should we be concerned about banning books and books getting banned? Would you like to start?
Sure. So because, knowledge, access to everything, and I think, the thing is, I feel like most of the people in this room hopefully are on the side of we shouldn't ban books, that's a bad idea. If you are unsure about that, that is okay. I'm sure you'll get a lot of new information tonight. So I'm not here to try to convince you that banning books is bad, because we know it is. And that's just proven through history. But it's because, where to start? Banning books is bad because that's where we learn everything. It's crippling society and our culture, and it's where it's not just about books, it's about everything, but once you start there, it's everywhere. So it is one of the most disastrous things that we can do as a people, as a culture, as a society, so a quote-unquote society, I think.
So here's the thing. We've seen what happens when libraries burn. We saw what happened and how far it set us back, going back to the Library of Alexandria. We saw what happened when the Nazis decided to burn the Hirschfeld Library, which was in the Hirschfeld Institute, which was the premier center for gender and sexuality, basically expression and research. And we're already starting to see it again now with Idaho, where libraries had to put a sign on the door saying you must be 18 years of age to enter, because the new Idaho law says people can privately sue a library if they feel there's something in the library that's detrimental. Not that they read something that's detrimental, or their kid read something that's detrimental. Actually, and of course my please pay to read this popped up. Any person who believes they have found material in a library that could be harmful to a minor may submit a written notice, and within 60 days the library must relocate that material to an area with adult access only. If the library fails to comply, and note there is no appeal system here, then the minor, parent, or legal guardian may bring legal action specifically against the library. Y'all, look, my accent's coming out, I know this. I am originally from Iowa, which I know a lot of people think of as just, you know, red all the way down. But I'm also 43 years old, so I'm from the Iowa that originally passed the Same-Sex Marriage Act before Minnesota did. As in, mind your own damn business and leave your nose out of other people's. This is just, mind your business.
I'm going to answer with an anecdote from work. We had done a library in Florida, which has its own issues. And there are a group of people that decide this is what they do every day, all day, is they try to figure out how to get into any and every school district and take whatever they deem is inappropriate off the shelves, whether or not they have a student enrolled there. So there was a gentleman that did that, and somehow he talked the superintendent into letting him go through a library that we had just put together and created, and he walked through it with our sales rep and pulled whatever books he wanted off of the shelves and sent them back to us and said, no, sorry, we can't do that. And some of the books were literal history books. Like one was a biography on Ruby Bridges. And I've never been so heated before in my life. My heart hurts for the kids that need a book in a library that a librarian wants to provide for them, but through the insanity of politics, they're not able to see themselves reflected in a collection.
Well, you know, what kind of effect does that have on a society if we end up having books banned and, in some cases, as you were describing, simply with so many barriers between people and the books that they cannot have access to them? What does that do to a society?
I mean, we have all that evidence of what it destroys society, but also, I mean, we were talking a little bit about this before we actually started, of just how it's not just about who gets to decide, right, and the choice on that one. And we're fighting this in education right now, like, what do I get to teach as a teacher? Who gets to decide that? And part of that is the books. And we know that people are scared of new ideas sometimes because new things are, you know, new. But we also, you can control a society that's not educated, right? And so if you're going to control society, one of the best things you can do is pull a source of knowledge. And we can argue we have a ton of knowledge in here, but that's not what most people are using it for. And how do you find it? And, you know, schools are trying. They're struggling. We're trying to make sure that we get how critical thinking works into our students' brains. That does not, you know, that's not everyone. And so having equitable and easy access for information and knowledge is the only way we get better as a society, the only way we move forward. I mean, I don't know, I get so frustrated with this because I just don't understand half the time. Like, I understand, like, on an intellectual level how someone can, like, decide, oh, we're not, you know, but I just don't understand how someone could actually say, you are not allowed to even know that that thing exists. you are not allowed to look at that because I told you to. And like, I'm a parent, I got kids, right? I tell my children all the time, like, no. Like, we're not allowed to do that. But there's a difference between infantilizing me as an adult and taking away my choices, and also infantilizing, frankly, our children who should have access to information. I mean, I can tell another story, but I'll let everyone else talk first about choice.
I mean, I've got a personal anecdote about this. I'm biracial. And growing up as a child, I saw absolutely no books about kids like me in the library at all. I saw no books about Hispanic families at all. So, you know, and growing up in mostly white at the time Iowa, I internalized a lot of shit. Let's put it that way. And then I get to college. And I am in my senior year of college, and I'm in a class called Gender and Sexualities. And for the first time, I hear the words asexual and bisexual. Two words that, I'm an early reader. I taught myself how to read in literally preschool. We got to kindergarten, and the teacher told my parents, Meredith won't read along with everybody else. She keeps pulling out a novel, and my parents said, excuse me? Despite having access to every book in the library, I was a senior in college before I figured out some very fundamental things about myself. And this is why having access to that is so important. Is it maybe uncomfortable to read about it first as you're, trying to figure out things? Yeah, maybe. But if we're not willing to be uncomfortable with ourselves, what are we really doing with our lives? You know what I mean? If you're not willing to push yourself to be the best you, and sometimes that means reading things you don't agree with, but because I didn't have access to those books as a kid and then a young adult, I was a full-ass grown adult before I figured some things out, and then it took another 10 years of figuring things out on top of that.
And going off of that, that's one of the things that always concerns me the most about this is, let's say there's a kid who is struggling with their identity, with their sexuality, and they internalize it so much that they begin to hate themselves to a degree that could lead to something incredibly tragic. And there's a million different factors that contribute to that, but one of the things that they teach us when you go to library school or be around a library is about the importance of windows and mirrors. You need the mirror to reflect yourself, but you need the window to see into the places that you otherwise wouldn't. Because how else are you supposed to understand other people?
Well, and that kind of gets into the next thing I wanted to talk about is, what are you seeing given as the reasons why books are being banned? And I would also add to that, do you think that's the real reason?
I mean, we've been given the reasons around ideas of religion or religious sensitivities, or sexual orientation being something that children shouldn't ever talk about sex, apparently, though that is not what's happening, and we just grow up ignorant. So the reasons, part of one of the things I want to talk about in this panel is the difference between making choices as an educator of what books I teach in my classroom versus denying access and banning a book outright. So in my school, we used to read the graphic novel Persepolis, which I love. It's a great graphic novel. But we actually stopped teaching it because it is kind of problematic in how, and one-sided in its representation of Muslim history and the Islamic faith. And a good half of my student population is Muslim. And so, now, does that mean I'm never going to teach that book again? No, but am I still looking for a book that has a lot of the same ideas and concepts and, things that we want to talk about, and, but also, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but we're looking for a better replacement that also is more, instead of single lens focused on what Islam is looking at a more rounded. So that's, but some people might say, well, that's banning a book, that's not in your classroom anymore, you took it off your curriculum. And that's not the same thing. And I know you're all intelligent people who can understand that, but it's just like how we talk about it in the world too, like taking what we talk about in here right now, and how do we talk about it with people who are maybe not feeling the same thing. Because y'all came to a panel on book banning at CONvergence, so like y'all are, so I'm guessing my audience here, like you're all there, so like it's more how do we talk about this outside of this room too. And so the differences between like making educated and thoughtful choices about like what our children read or what I read or what I have access to in my classroom, that's a great power, and it's got to be done with thoughtfulness. But it's also not denying people access to it or saying that it exists. And I could teach that book because we just have to talk about it. That's the other part of that is, okay, I love that book. There's a lot of great things about it. It's a lot of great stuff, but. So I apologize for going rambling.
No, and I would also add to that is that the way that you're explaining it is perfectly legitimate, and it's what happens all the time when we're making curriculum decisions about what's going to be taught and what isn't and why one way or another. But I am seeing that same rationale used to ban books as. And I suspect it's not the real reason. Mm-hmm. It's people are saying, people who want something banned will use the rationale of, well, it's just a choice, and you can make a different choice. When you're building a collection in a library, you always select, so just don't select this book.
Yeah, and that's the complicated, like, what's the difference between like this thing and that thing? Mm-hmm. And that's where the conversation has to happen around, and that's because that's a slippery slope, as we talk about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say that in your situation, I know I taught books when I was back in the classroom that I now ban books, and it isn't a single choice. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about curriculum. When you're talking about curriculum, it's a committee, and it goes through a process. So there's a little more, as you said, thoughtfulness that goes into that. Mm-hmm. Okay, what have you seen for reasons why books get banned?
Something you said about things kids aren't supposed to know, kids aren't supposed to think about. Who here is old enough to remember on Sesame Street when Snuffleupagus was imaginary? And then they realized that was encouraging kids to like keep secrets or tell them that they weren't going to be believed when they said something was real, so Snuffy had to become real. Okay. We are doing the exact same thing with these book bans. We're telling kids, oh, this isn't real. Like, duh. Personally, I haven't seen any book bans that we would think of as book bans at my college because we are a college. However, I see what I call the silent ban, which is my funding. As in, we were given $0 to purchase new materials this year. And because of staff attrition and staff positions that weren't replaced, we no longer do book displays. So there's nothing visually there to challenge. So personally, I call that the silent ban, when you are given $0 to purchase anything. Because that effectively bans everything. That bans teachers from making requests for us to purchase things for them to use in their classrooms. The purchases that we are making, we're taking money out of other budgets to make those purchases. So personally, I view that as a silent ban on purchasing anything. We're doing it anyway, but we're breaking the rules to do it.
I'd like to circle back to what you're saying about the selection process, because that's what I know the most about, considering my field of work. And a lot of the things that we have to do when we're building a collection for these different schools, and when I say building a collection, it's a brand new school. I don't deal with anything under $20,000. Like, these are thousands of books. And we make these lists, and people have to go through and peruse them and decide what is or is not okay. I often get directives from the people I'm building this for to not include any LGBTQIA books. to make sure that it is conservative. And conservative in Texas and conservative in New York are incredibly different conservatives. Conservative Texas means very Christian-backed. Conservative New York means void of religion, which I learned this year. And it's just, it's interesting when you build a list, you build a well-rounded list, and then you go to, we have a really nice thing that we added so that people could know what their diversity percentages were. So we have a tag for LGBTQIA books, and we thought it was the most wonderful thing. Now we click that tag and deselect everything because we've made them easy to find. So the main thing that these librarians are trying to do is they're scared because they're trying to anticipate issues that are going to happen. A lot of these schools, I had a lot of New York projects this year, and none of the schools are going to have librarians at all. So they wanted us to be incredibly cautious with these lists because there's not going to be a librarian there to do reader's advisory for a book that might be a little bit more emotionally draining for some children, which I understand to an extent. I just wish that they had librarians and that we could build these robust and reflective collections for their communities. But a lot of these teachers and librarians are doing the best they can with what they've been given, and they haven't been given a lot.
You're kind of already getting into something that I hope that we would get into, and that is that what we're seeing across the country is not just the banning of books, but also those subversive ways of taking those things out of circulation, taking all books out of circulation. There is actually a push to privatize public libraries, which is an oxymoron, but to turn them over to a third party, and that third party would be for profit. So imagine a public library for profit that is not controlled by the community, but is controlled by a company. And what you're talking about with budgets, slashing budgets, what you're talking about with getting rid of staff, with library staff, that's happening in the schools too, with cutting back on the library staff. So then, like you're saying, then you don't have that adult standing there saying, okay, I know what your reading level is. Here are some appropriate books for you. So there are some things happening like that too. Some of the things that I see as reasons given for banning books is language. If the F-bomb is dropped, that would be enough.
Have they never heard people speak inside a Walmart?
Have they never been to a junior high? Well, they're not junior highs anymore, but I taught 8th graders for a number of years, and yeah.
I always used to say, back when I was in college, that I also grew up in Iowa, and I got most of my sex education on the public school bus. Not even joking.
Like y'all, you ain't never driven past a farm during calving season? Seriously? And there goes my accent again.
I also see religion being used frequently as a reason for banning a book. I have seen lack of religion used, which is also kind of interesting. If there is no religion in it, then it's considered atheist, and therefore we have to ban it. Definitely LGBTQ has been like a huge one going across. And at least they're open about that one. I see some LGBTQ books that are banned based on language or other reasons other than the fact that it is a relationship situation that some people are uncomfortable with.
They're not willing to call a spade a spade.
No, there's usually something like, oh, this is sexually explicit because they use the word gay. Like that equates to sex in a lot of people's minds.
Yes.
And that's been frustrating for, we also have, so this is actually the last year, was the first year I had students whose parents said, my student will not be learning, will not be viewing that book while you're teaching that book in class because there's a gay couple in it. Which was The Marrow Thieves, by the way, by Sheridan Williams, and it's great. Native American dystopia. But they, so, and legally, absolutely, they're allowed to do that, right? So their parents can say, my child will not, you know, that's your curriculum, and we're not gonna let them do that, so you have to offer an alternative as a public school. And which then puts another onus on the teacher, which is always fun, right? Like, yes, let's make a whole new curriculum for one child. But it's all these little things. It's never exactly what they say, like you were saying. It's always not the reason that they give, but the underlying reason that they give for everything. I'm lucky that I haven't had to run into a lot of like racially motivated bans or not wanting to do books, but I've had that. I was in Florida this last December for a training for International Baccalaureate, which is a advanced international program, yeah, IB. And I was talking, what?
Great program.
It is, yeah. I love it, I just teach it here. But the teachers there I was working with, some of them were very local because they were in Florida, and they were talking about how their libraries are being, like literally just all the shelves are cleared. Their books in their classrooms, they're all cleared out. People came in and overnight it felt like they suddenly didn't have a library anymore, and they've had to like say, in the middle of in our trainings, like, so we can't talk about this thing that IB says we have to talk about. We can't talk about that in my classroom because the law says I can't. What am I gonna do? And teachers who have to stop talking about their own life experiences because they're people of color, and they say, but I'm not allowed to talk about this. So they have to stop a conversation in the middle of class. And not only is that like problematic and traumatizing for the students because it's not reflecting their own life experience, it's not giving them their history, it's not giving reality, it is also, frankly, it's awful for the adults in the room too, right? And what do? Do you leave because you don't want to be in that environment anymore, or do you stay because you want something for these kids, right? Because if you leave, who's going to take your place? And that's the other moving forward. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I can only speak for the state of Minnesota because this is the only state that I have been involved in education in. But here, every school district has a policy for how someone can request review of materials. I mean, you have to have it. So this is going back decades. So this is nothing new. So school districts do have a process set up if someone wants to request a book being removed. So like, I was in a district where we had a parent who objected to Gossip Girls. I don't know if you've ever read it, and it's about what it sounds like. And so I read it, and it's like, oh, this is garbage. But you know what we have? Sometimes you want to read garbage. So, you know, we should keep it. So in the end we did. I mean, it wasn't my sole decision by any means, it was a committee, but there is a process that is set up. In the district where I currently live, where my kids went to school, we had a vocal group that tried to get actually many books removed from the library, but they started with one book, and the way that the policy is written in the school district, it must be a parent, and these were not parents. So they had to find a parent to come in. And it's not that way everywhere, because I see stuff in many other states, like in California, where it's like 97% of the challenges that are done to materials in school libraries are done by like 10 people across the whole state. I mean, and that's not, in fact, I actually think it's 7 people, so I'm trying to just go on the other side because it sounds like such an absurd number. Anyway, we had a parent who challenged the book Sold. Tricia McCormick?
Yeah.
You know the book? And it is about a girl in, I want to say, Pakistan.
I think that's right.
She's a little girl in Pakistan, and she gets sold to a brothel. And her mother thinks that she's going to go work for a family and be like a caretaker for kids and stuff like that, and work in the house. And so she ends up doing this. And so there's graphic sex in it, but I'll tell you, it's a really powerful book. It's episodic in how it's written, which isn't my taste, but nonetheless, it's very powerful. And it was used in the classroom in the past, where for like a book circle. So it's like a group of kids read it, and then the whole point of the exercise is that they would read a book, and then they would do a social community action based on it. So they read the book, and then they investigated sex trafficking in Minnesota. So for them, it was this fabulous experience, and we had one of those students write this beautiful, wonderful letter to the school board saying, "Do not ban this book. This is a great book." We also did some other letter writing and such to the school board, and letters to the editor and some stuff like that, and it was not banned. But we were very fortunate from many standpoints in the community that we have, which is a super conservative community, but in people stepping forward. And I went on too long for that, but nonetheless, I mean, that just happened this past school year. And now there's, unfortunately, because of that, and that getting rolled in, started, now they're doing all of this review of books for age appropriateness, and that's another thing that gets used to is, it's not age appropriate. Well, okay, anyway, other reasons why you know if things have been banned, or experiences that you know about that you've maybe been involved in?
I mean, I mentioned the situation in Idaho where one library's just put a "No one under 18" sign on the door, and that just... I know a lot about a lot of older book bans because I used to work at the University of Minnesota, specifically in the children's literature research collections, directly with the personal papers of authors and illustrators. And you would find, for instance, we have a lot of Judy Blume's original manuscripts, her letters with other authors, letters back and forth with her publisher about who's trying to ban her book this time. Same with Lois Lowry and The Giver. Also, Goodnight Moon. Who here remembers Goodnight Moon? Did you know some of the illustrations were originally changed from what was originally painted because they didn't want a map of a certain part of the world in the little bunny's room? Hey, there's a new fun fact for you. And these are all things that actually you as the public can view. You can make an appointment at the archives. You can request the papers of your favorite author or illustrator. You can go through and read their manuscript pages, see what changes were made. You can read the letters from their publishers about the book bans and what they're for this time. And I think it's really interesting looking at some of those historic bans, and usually it's like one parent raising a fuss that goes through an entire town and an entire library, to the coordinated campaigns we're seeing today. Like the book bans of the 80s are very different than what we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch on really quick. You had said about the book banning process in Minnesota. I know a lot of schools outside of Minnesota don't have a process, which is where they're getting into sticky situations because no one ever set one up before, and so now all of a sudden they finally hired a librarian that knows what they're doing, and they don't even know where to start to create a process. Because it's a little bit of an endeavor because you have to get it approved by so many different people. It's something that is necessary and vital, but it's also something that a lot of school districts just unfortunately haven't had.
That surprises me because I'm pretty sure it's in statute. But,
Yeah.
okay, but I've also seen other things that's in statute that a little tiny school district did not do because they were so overwhelmed. So.
I mean, it's kind of like how everything is legal in New Jersey. There's some places where just people, it hadn't even occurred to them that a book would be banned. Why should they have a process for reviewing books that have been challenged? And like Crystal said, once you get in there and you try to make that policy, well, now you got 15 cooks in the kitchen, half of whom have opposing ideologies about how this should go. And you got to get all 15 of them to sign off on it.
Okay, let's throw it open to the audience and see. Audience, do you have some questions or some thoughts? Do you? Sure.
So how many remember Little Black Sambo?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I was a kid, I remember I cried, my mom read it to me when I was 4. I cried when he lost his clothes, but I remember I got all the butter and took it home, you know, I thought that was a pretty good move on his part. And he got banned for some reason, I don't know why. I think he was black is the reason.
Yes, yeah, it was a racial thing on that one, but when you bring up nudity, now I have to think of the Marie Sandeck. What's the Marie Sandeck?
Night Kitchen.
Yeah, Night Kitchen.
I love that book.
Night Kitchen, which is a fabulous children's book, and it's got one little illustration where a little kid has no clothes on, and it's been banned because of that.
And yet people post pictures of their children naked in the bathtub on Facebook all the time. Y'all, that's where the people are scraping the CP from.
I don't remember the Little Black Sambo had a picture of the naked, I just remember he lost his clothes, which when you're 4 does not necessarily equate to, you know, being naked.
You didn't comment?
Yeah, like even related to that. I mean, no one says it when they're trying to ban these books, obviously, but the way that sex ed is taught in this country, so many kids, obviously the sex trafficking conversation that you brought up is an extreme example, but so many kids don't even realize that they're in these situations where they've been abused. And because they're not exposed to the material that could help them understand that, because it's been banned, because it's not age appropriate, they're never going to learn. And it just makes things so much worse for kids.
Yes, following up on that, I read of one school that actually did ban the surviving sexual abuse workbook because it contained sexual material.
Gosh, what a surprise.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the term dishonest harmony. So many people would rather have a dishonest harmony where everything looks perfect on the outside, like you are 100%, oh, your family's perfect, everything's perfect, and underneath everything is absolutely wrong. But rather than fix anything or admit that anything could even be better, they would rather sit with the dishonest harmony that harms everybody involved in the situation. And it's where, you know, the one that sticks out is the nail that gets the hammer, right? So rather than be like, okay, well, if we've got all these nails sticking out of the board, maybe we need to look at the problem with the board or the crafts person, but instead, oh no, it's dishonest harmony. Nothing's actually sticking out. This board isn't actually warped. Everything's fine. And it's this dedication to this concept of dishonest harmony that I think is causing a lot of these bans because they can't have anything that challenges that.
And I've also, just kind of piggybacking on that, I've seen books that have been banned because they were they dealt with difficult situations, and there was not a happy ending. Oh, gotta ban this book because it was not a happy ending. Well, you know, welcome to reality.
I love those books.
Are there books that, like, a little like Sample and a few others that they should never have been in the school district, but people want them there? It's like, you know, the first, I mean, I had somebody talking earlier about my or something else. It's like, you know.
No, Mein Kampf absolutely belongs in the library, because where else are you going to read it and recognize it?
In the school district.
In the school district.
In
The
the
Bible.
school district, you have to pay attention to the interest levels of the book, which comes most of the time from publishers, and every publisher looks at things differently. I know there was, Texas was trying to get an idea that each place that supplies books, be it bookshops or wholesalers, has to come up with almost like a rating system for books. And in my opinion, that shouldn't be on the sellers, that should be on the publishers underneath a different umbrella, like how they do movies and TV, if they want to actually make it a consistent rating. But I also see that as a very slippery slope.
I guess I was thinking of our, like, some of these religious texts, that, you know.
This is where we fall into, you need to trust the experts in their field to actually be experts in their field. And it, you know, I am a trained teacher, you are a trained librarian, a trained archivist, a trained, you know, we talk about these things, that's what the training is about. And so we're never, you know, not always going to make the perfect choices ever, okay, I guess, but like, that doesn't, what's really frustrating is that this is the part of, like, especially in schools and educational facilities, where people feel like they're better or more knowledgeable than the experts.
And this is where cataloging is also very important.
Yes.
Cataloging and metadata. So you have the right subject headings. So when you're looking up books, you're finding materials that are relevant to what you're looking for, that you're not finding things that don't actually have anything to do with it. You can stay within whatever it is you're supposed to be researching. And you know, if you click a different subject heading, and you click a different, you know, you've all been on Wikipedia. It happens.
Yep.
People will get there eventually, but I cannot stress enough the importance of, like, proper cataloging and metadata, so that when people are looking up these books in catalogs, they know what they're looking at and can make the informed decision whether they want to go get it off the shelf. And even just picking it up off the shelf, you are not, like, immediately now blood sworn to take that book out of the library. You can open it up. You can read a chapter, you can flip to the end and read the end. And you can choose to put it back on the reshelving cart, do not put it back on the shelf, then you mess with our statistics.
So is there any kind of, like, issue that gets run into where it's like coming up with the system to ban a book versus not having a system at all? Like, is there a weird, like, if there's no system at all, it's really easy to get a book banned, versus if there's a system, well, now there's a system? Like, is there any kind of...
Oh, it's so much better to have a process, because by having a process, it does a couple of things, but one really important thing that it does is it takes away the emotional baggage. So it's like, oh, you're concerned about this book. Okay, this is the process. Please fill out this form. We can tell you exactly what's going to happen. And it will be reviewed by people, and you will find out what the decision was. In fact, with SOLD that we just had in our school district, it went through what would be the regular process, and the parent did not accept the results of that process and appealed to the superintendent. The superintendent upheld the decision of the committee that said it should stay in the library. The parent did not accept that and took it to the school board, and then the school board made the final decision about keeping it. in the library. Now, it was kept in the library with a flag on it so that it needed parental permission. But that's not the only book that's in there that needs parental permission, and with the automated systems that we have now, it's not even a cumbersome kind of thing to do as a parent, to say yay or nay to that kind of thing. And if you don't have a process, then it can become, you're a bad person, and no, I'm a bad person, and everyone is a bad person because they disagree.
In my experience with school districts not having a policy, it comes down a lot to a power dynamic. If a parent is making a stink and the principal or the superintendent just wants it to stop, they will go and either take the book off the shelf themselves or tell the librarian to take the book off the shelf. And then the librarian doesn't have a leg to stand on because there's no process. When there's a process, they can fall back on it and say, this is the approved way to do it, this is the way we're going to do it. If you have a problem with it, that's not my problem. And I think it really puts the power back into the library, where it should be in all things library. And it makes a librarian not scared to stand up for their collection.
I can tell you of an experience, one of my very first positions in education. I was at a school district, and I did not know this was happening until someone else told me, is that the library would order books, and when the books came in, the secretaries would go through the books, and if there were books that they didn't think were appropriate, they would throw them away. Yes.
Not even return them?
No, not even return them, because...
Man, not even sell them to Better World Books?
So if they get caught, they get fired? Destruction of property?
Oh, no.
It was probably under the directive of the...
Yeah, they were allowed to do that. So when you're talking about professionals and people who... Okay, I'm married to a librarian. I probably should have disclosed that to begin with. So I do have that prejudice.
Hidden agendas.
Librarian agendas would be so organized.
But librarians go through a lot of work to make selections, and part of what they're looking for is they are looking for a balance of voices. They're looking for multiple voices that they can bring in, and they read a lot of reviews, and they do a lot of research, and they talk to a lot of people when they're making selections for books. So they're not just going down and saying, oh, I've got $5, what one costs $5? And at least hopefully they're not doing that. I mean, a budget is a concern, but still, I mean, there are people who stay knowledgeable in what's going on in what's being published.
Yeah, I have a question. The saying is that the more something is made forbidden, the more attractive it actually becomes. Isn't that what's happening here with all of the various processes that are taking place around the country? That the more they say, no, you're not going to be able to read this because it contains X, Y, and Z, wouldn't the general public be more inclined to want to go buy that book because it contains X, Y, and Z?
Sometimes, yes.
There's a really good Stephen King quote where he says that children should find out what books are being banned or being kept from them, and then they should go and find them and see what information is being kept from them. And it's very important.
And some of the bigger public libraries, like the New York Public Library, is offering an online library card to anybody that you can use their e-books. And that's great if you are a child who has unmonitored access to the internet. Or if you go to school and you're using a school computer to monitor the internet. If you have a parent who's very closely monitoring your phone or your internet usage, that's not quite as helpful. But kids will always find a way around that. And I say that as the kid whose mother marched her into the librarian's office at my local public library and said, let her out of the children's room. I don't care that she's 7. She's read everything in there. I'm tired of her dragging me over to the big sci-fi books and making me check them out on my card for her. She needs to be responsible for her own overdue fines. And I would bring, anything I brought home, my mom would take out of my bag and read the back and flip through it and decide yes or no, but for the most part I was left unattended, which is how as a 10-year-old I was introduced to DC Comics' Hellblazer. And that's why I'm here today, boys and girls. But yeah, the more you tell a kid, oh, you can't do that, they're either going to A, double their internalized shame about it, which is a huge risk, or B, become a delinquent. Yay!
So on the other hand of that is also like, they don't know what they don't know sometimes. So it's, if I don't know about it, and I don't know how to find it, or I don't even know to go look for it, it becomes the problem. What I'm seeing right now is, they fall into the weirdest rabbit holes online, I'm not gonna lie, my teenagers. All teenagers.
Give me the toilet, I still don't get it.
They've had to explain so many things to me, and I just go, stop. I don't even want to know anymore. Just stop. I'll be uncool. But there is that, like, not every kid is super curious about everything, and that's a problem too on another level. But it's, being able to not just, they want to go find it because like, oh, it's bad, I'm a rebel, or, but that internalized shame actually, I think is almost just as prevalent. We just don't think about it or talk about it like, oh, this is wrong, this is bad, I'm wrong, I'm bad, for wanting to know, for having that question, for thinking about this, something is wrong with me.
Especially children in, say, a situation where they're in a religion that relies very heavily on shame to keep people in line. They're not just getting it from their parents, they're getting it from their trusted elders, their peers. Peer tattling, oof, that's always a rough one. It can be tough.
Way in the back there.
Yeah, so bear in mind, I taught like Handmaid's Tale and Brave New World.
Yeah.
So like I'm in that as a teacher, but I guess I'm just wondering, as like a librarian, there is such a range between like a 6th grader and an 8th grader and a freshman versus a senior, and they're probably having access to the same library. I think you spoke to it with like parental permissions and things like that on certain books. Well, what are some ways to say, like, you don't necessarily want to ban a book from kids being able to read, but it also might have a maturity that certain ages aren't quite necessarily ready for, or there's a more legitimate concern of this is 50 Shades of Grey. I don't know if your 8-year-old.
This is why those schools need librarians, because here's the thing, they need readers advisory, because I am staunchly against labeling anything by age group, because age has nothing to do with maturity or situation at all.
But also,
go ahead.
Hopefully, 50 Shades of Grey would never be in a school library. Just putting that out there. Something that I had to bring to my colleagues' notice was we used to have, A Court of Thorns and Roses on our high school lists, and I'm
Fairy
like,
smut.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna tell you guys, we don't want to have those on our list. Like, if other people want to put them on the list, that's fine, but we're not going to suggest those titles.
So the weirdest conversation I've ever had with a student is they were trying to give me their romance novel, like, you should read this list, and I was like, I feel like you can give me that on your graduation day.
Yes, yes. But otherwise, like, having a librarian that is well-versed in the collection, knows the kids because they are able to actually spend time in the library is invaluable. Like, that's what we go to school for, that's what we learn on the job, is reader's advisory and how to steer a kid into the direction that they need. Not necessarily that is wanted by the parents or by the child even. Sometimes it's saying, you look like this might speak to you. And sometimes the kid doesn't even realize that's what they need. And that's incredibly important. But also just, making sure we don't have 50 Shades of Grey in schools.
How many of you, when you were growing up, read beyond your grade level? Yeah.
We know our target audience here.
Handmaid's Tale. Handmaid's Tale has been banned by entire countries.
Yep.
Yes, and not for the
I
sex.
think it's got a chapter in here, actually.
The whole idea of the book.
At least that's not what they say. It's not banned because of any sexual content. It's banned because it's anti-religious, anti-Christian, which is interesting because the oppressive group is never, ever, ever identified as Christian or religious in any way.
They're tattling on themselves. And which just drives me nuts because the hypocrisy, I think, is what really gets to me, like rules for thee but not for me. And at the same time I'm muttering under my breath, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. I was a theology major.
So I recently got my hands on this book by DK that's about different banned books throughout history. Starts in like the 1500s, and there's a whole chapter on The Handmaid's Tale. And it talks about how parents in the US have mounted challenges on various grounds, but only few have been successful. The primary concern has been Atwood's graphic depiction of sex, in addition to ritual rape. It talks about Offred being taken to a brothel by the commander, despite non-reproductive sex being prohibited in Gilead. And these, quote, lurid passages have led to multiple petitions to ban the novel in schools. There have also been allegations that the novel is offensive to Christians. And then in recent years, it has been claimed as a symbol of resistance. And
I just have to wonder who's getting off to Handmaid's Tale. if it's lurid, like, ooh, that's also telling on yourself, buddy.
Right?
I can also tell you, when we were going through the whole thing with Sold, I hate to even call him a pastor. He says he's a pastor. He has a church. His point was it should be banned because it would encourage girls to go out and do that. And it's like, what? It would encourage girls to go out and get sold into a brothel and be raped? I don't think it would. I just really don't think so.
No one's glorifying any of that. And that's the other part of this is like reading the hard stuff about like there are hard things in the world. And what my hated one is that like, oh, well, this story ends sadly or it ends badly. And it hurt my feelings. Like that's what they're doing a lot with historical, books about, history of, that's not supposed to make you comfortable. Come to the panel tomorrow at 12:30. But you can't just say that doesn't exist or I'm gonna just go la 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 la, right? Because it does exist, and it did exist, and it did happen, and it does happen, and how are we gonna and my question is always like, what is your vision of a society that, that is not a thing that we need to talk about?
Okay, we're getting down to the end, so I'll ask the panelists for their final thoughts, and I will start with Crystal at this end.
sometimes it feels really bleak when you hear all of these things going on. We had a few wonderful years where there were so many champions for books and ideas that were underdogs, and now the pendulum is swinging violently in the other direction. Unfortunately, it's a cycle, and one we've seen before. So all we can say is, you know, stand tall, keep to your guns, but not actually your guns, and persevere.
We've talked a little bit and a lot about why we think this is happening and how it's happening. And I remember during a certain presidential cycle, Laura Bush came to my elementary school and read to us. And she talked to us about how important books were and how important it was for all of us to find the books that spoke to us and read those books and share those books with our friends. And I think what we've seen is a shift away from that away from what that First Lady said, into thinking that the existence of a book means that you are approving of what happens in its pages, or you endorse it. People don't necessarily understand anymore that a book can simply exist as a book. It's not a judge of your moral character or your personal beliefs for that book to exist. The book in and of itself is a neutral object, and what you're projecting on it is what's making you feel bad. And I think that's a very sad shift, and it hurts my little blackened heart.
I guess I'll end with just remember, go to those meetings, talk to people, and read yourself. If you have kids, read to them. If you have nibblings, read to them. Go to read to people, and because that's the best way, one, to help people know more things and help our students actually be better students, is read to them early and read to them often. But it's also the best way to keep banned books alive.
And I'll end on a good note too. One of the things that came out of our experience with the uproar in our community over the banned book was that our local bookstore organized a banned book night where people read out loud from banned books. And it was a hoot and a half. We had a wonderful time, and it was Judy Blume was represented, and I can't even think of some of the other books that were read from, but they were all really wonderful to actually hear people read out loud and books that you're not supposed to read. So it was great. Thank you very much. Thanks very much to the panelists. You guys are great. Wonderful.